Lynsie, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm super grateful and I'm really excited about our conversation. But before we jump into it, I do want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners and let us know a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do.
That's such a big question. Who am I? We ask this question in yoga all the time, and we're always trying to dissolve all the labels. And so when someone asks you like who you are, what you do, then all the labels come right back on.
Yeah.
So, but what I do, let's start with that, is what's really moving through me right now and what I'm feeling most guided to do in my life right now is to really support people and coming back home into this understanding of who they are outside of all the labels that society puts on them. And
Right.
when we do that, what happens is that we become more empowered and more present and able to navigate through life's challenges with more ease. So that's essentially what I do. Now, the label for that, oh, there's so many things I could call myself. I could call myself a yoga and meditation educator or a spiritual empowerment coach. I'm also a speaker, but I always feel like these labels just really don't encapsulate what we actually do um, as people that are healers or in the service or anything that we do in life. So
Mm.
I don't know if that was exactly what you were asking or wanting me to reply, but
No, no, this
mm,
is great. And, one of the things I picked up on, as you mentioned, because it resonates for me too, is in terms of where you're being guided and in this moment, what you're feeling you need to do. Has that always been the case, or it's constantly been a journey and it's changed over time? And the reason why I ask, because that's what it is for me as well. We have seasons in our lives that tend to direct us and guide us in different directions, I suppose. But yeah.
it's always been, I've always had this deep connection to or yearning for a deep connection to spirit, and the way that that has moved through me has changed over time. Now, did I always have in mind that this is what I would be doing for a living? No. I mean, my path was very different when I was younger. But as so many people on their journeys will tell you, that there's certain things that happen in life that kind of redirect them. And I feel like it's just the universe's way of not denying you what you thought you wanted, but actually directing you to what's really most aligned with your heart and your soul. And so, and I do feel like that evolves. Like what I'm doing right now is different than what I was doing 2 years ago. It's still within the same vein, but it has taken a new iteration and started to expand and grow in a way that I wouldn't have been able to really accept or own at that point in my life. So I
Hmm.
think it's always evolving. And the key is to really be okay with allowing things to unfurl the way that they're meant to unfurl for you, and to not
Right.
grip too tightly to an expectation that you've placed on yourself or someone else has placed upon you.
Right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And to your point, kind of not getting too attached to any of those things, right? And letting it flow through you, as you mentioned. And that kind of feeds into the conversation I wanted to have with you, is around these energies we experience, right? And you and I touched on offline around the aspect of the masculine and feminine that keeps coming up quite a bit. It's talked about, I see it all over social media too, but I guess what I wanted to explore was this understanding of what does that even mean, because you see it everywhere and people tend to put labels around it, as you mentioned earlier. So how do we understand what this means, and how can people step into their energies? And the other thing I want to perhaps touch on, if we get there, is this aspect of safety as well. There's a conversation around what does safety even mean when you're in those, embodying those energies.
Okay, so that's a lot of questions. So let me. You might help me
Yeah, yeah.
remember all of them. So let me just start with, like, yes, divine feminine, divine masculine language is starting to trend right now. which is a good thing. But we also have to understand that there's something much deeper than a trend. And we want to really sink into our own bodies for the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Because oftentimes with these trends, they will create a little bit of a vibration within us or a resonance, and we're like, oh, that sounds really true to me. And then you start to look outside of yourself for the answers again. But when we really want to understand these energies, these really potent energies, we have to understand that they're within us. They're also all around us, but the best way to understand them is to start to understand our own bodies, our own energies, our own minds, and allow the unfurling to happen for us with some guidance from, teachers is always helpful, but the teachers are not always going to have all the answers for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and at this level of my understanding where I am in my life, this is my understanding of the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and it can evolve, and it's meant to evolve. So what I'm telling you now, I'm just saying that it could evolve in 5 years from now. And so we hold within us, and some of the information I'm sharing with you does come from ancient wisdom, especially from the yogic philosophy and teachings, that within us we hold divine masculine and divine feminine energies, regardless of gender or gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one is not better than the other.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and if we look to the yin yang symbol in ancient Chinese philosophy, we can see that just from this symbol that the feminine and the masculine energies are equal, and they're meant to be in harmony with each other. They're counterbalancing, they're interconnected. And so what we do as humans, we always want to put the label on something, and we want to identify as good, bad, better than, less than. And so we have to understand that these energies are meant to be equal and in harmony within us, and one is not better than the other. But because our culture likes to label things, what's happened is we've labeled one as being better than the other
Right.
through millennia of conditioning. And the one that
Mm-hmm.
we've determined to be better than is the masculine energy. And so what happens is when we identify with only one half of ourselves, because it's just one half of ourselves, if we put all of our energy into that one thing, that aspect of ourselves can actually become inflamed and can turn
Right.
toxic. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just like if we put too much energy in that, it becomes out of balance. And anything that becomes out of balance can become inflamed and toxic. And the other part that is just as important has now become more dormant, and has now, we've lost touch with the power those aspects of ourselves have.
Right.
And so now it starts to play out in our physical bodies, our emotional, our mental bodies, our ability to connect to spirit, and then it starts to manifest in physical form in a lot of different ways, and permeates through our culture. So guide me with the next question, because
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like I'm
No.
going off on a tangent right now.
No. No. I think this is good. I guess so. So there's this aspect of what's coming for me right now in terms of what you've shared is there. There's resistance to embodying those energies, right? So, how can people become more aware of whether it's the divine masculine or feminine energy, and
Mm-hmm.
how can they get more comfortable with it? Because I think society almost teaches you ways to perhaps push back and resist, whereas if you were to just accept, it's a lot easier. At least this is what I've observed, and that's my experience. But I don't know if that's holds true for everyone. But I just wanted to get your thoughts around it.
Yeah. So, as soon as we're born, you know, the doctor, your parents look down and they see what sex you are, and immediately in that moment there are labels put upon you, like who you're going to be, what you're going to be able to do with your life. And that's unfortunate, because from that point forward you're essentially being conditioned to fall in line with whatever gender you were born with. And and that immediately starts to deny part of our potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, if you're born male, there's an idea that you're going to be able to go out there and be more direct. You're going to be able to accomplish things. You're going to have a certain level of success that's going to look different than a female. And then if you're a female, the predominant view is that, oh, you're going to be more quiet or gentle. You're going to be more nurturing. And what happens is we start to see ourselves and our potential through this lens. Like it's like these glasses have been put on us from the moment that we are born, and then we start to see all life through that. And so it starts to limit us. And so what we want to do is start to remove those and start to feel into and understand that these energies are, it's kind of like if you want to think of potential energy that we
Mm-hmm.
have untapped into. And if our society always wants to be like thriving and, achieving the best version of ourselves. But how can we achieve the best version of ourselves if we're denying half of our potential energy? So we have this potential energy that we've completely ignored that actually can provide us with greater understanding of who we are and a deepening connection to higher levels of consciousness. Because I'll back up a little bit and say that it's the divine feminine that has the ability to tap in and tune in to the higher levels of consciousness, to the intuitive realms, to
Mm-hmm.
connections and the wisdom of nature, to a higher self. And so if we're not tapping into those parts of our abilities, like you just want to think of this is part of your ability to expand and to grow and to thrive. And so if you can tap into those potential energies, then what's going to happen is you're going to be able to step out, get outside of the box that you've all the labels that have been placed on you and that are actually binding you in this particular form. If you can break free of that and start to awaken these other energies, then you're going to be able to tap into greater levels of consciousness, which is going to help you find solutions to complex problems. It's going to enable you to really see yourself as a much more expanded version than society is limiting you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it's really, to your point, stepping into it and not resisting it, right? That's kind of what I.
Yeah, and and that's difficult to do because for millennia we've said that the feminine is weak
Mm,
and subservient, or the feminine is actually meant to, if we're, and sometimes the divine feminine gets mixed with being feminine.
right.
And so, but we've been taught to view that our feminine nature is not what's going to bring us success and happiness. It's like kind of an aside. It's
Yeah.
weaker than. And it's unfortunate because regardless of gender or gender identity, we can feel this, whether you're female, male, cis, or trans. And it's like, well, if I really embrace this aspect of myself, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to be ridiculed? Because what happens is when, even if we're talking about the female gender, we've been for decades been trying to fit ourselves into the masculine model because that's the role, that's the ideal of success, and we have to fit in and integrate, because if we don't fit in and integrate, then we are going to be ridiculed. Or And so what we want to do is like, okay, that model is not working, it doesn't work for everyone, and it's
Mm-hmm.
actually it's out of balance. So we want to bring in this ability to be like, okay, can we understand that it's not, the feminine nature isn't weak or less than, it is just this untapped resource that can actually lead us into a new paradigm. And a lot of people don't want that new paradigm, you know, but the feminine nature itself is one that is deeply healing and deeply nurturing, that is embraces more collaboration and instead of competition.
Mm,
And this is, you know goes against, our culture, especially here in the United States and Western cultures, like it's all about capitalism and pushing ourselves to the extremes,
Right.
power over, got to be the best, you got to be number one, you got to burn the candle at both ends to the
Yeah.
detriment, step on anyone's neck to get to the top,
Right. Yeah.
which is the
Yeah.
extreme masculine, because the masculine is actually a beautiful energy that is really meant to be like, when it's balanced, is in is really a protective energy, a protection out of love.
Right.
And it's this activating energy that can propel us forward in great acts of love and service. But when it's out of balance, what happens is that tendency to want to protect becomes this tendency to want to control
Mm-hmm.
out of fear instead of protect out of love.
Yeah. 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 I mean, and a couple of things that come up. So I'll ask the first question there. Well, so obviously you touched on when the feminine's trying to step into the masculine, that sometimes that's being pushed by society or culture, which can be an issue. So how do you find that, and I think you touched on it, that balance rather than trying to feed into what you're being told? Like, how can you embrace it? And then I guess the other piece is the in general, I guess for both the masculine and feminine, that healthy balance, because it seems like it is out of balance, and there's that struggle there. So I don't know if that makes sense, the question I'm trying to formulate here, but I guess what I'm trying to get at is really accepting who you are and finding that right balance rather than trying to step into something that maybe you're not, and that could create a lot of issues.
Hmm. Well, let me just back up that a little bit,
Sure.
because I feel like maybe a good place to start is like, how do we know if we are out of balance?
Right.
What does that even feel like? How does that actually practically, what does that look like in our bodies and feel like?
Hmm.
And so one way to know that if we're out of balance, we've kind of touched on some of that need to constantly push and strive at the expense of our own bodies and maybe even other people or our environment. But some physical symptoms that can show up is this tendency to feel overworked, exhausted, like you're burning, like you're wired and tired at the same time. If you're constantly having creative blocks and you feel like you have to grit your way through things or push and control your way through something. And a physical symptom can be this constant knot in the gut. And so that's how we can tell that the feminine energy is a little out of balance or a lot out of balance, depending on how frequently you're having these symptoms. And chronic illness can be a sign of, like, you're always getting sick. That can be a
Hmm.
sign that you're out of balance. And I'll touch on why that is in a minute. And then the mental symptoms of when the feminine energy is out of balance is when we are more negative. Like, we are constantly seeing the worst in things before we see the best in things. We see what is wrong before we see what is beautiful. And
Hmm.
so we're constantly having negative or disempowering thoughts versus seeing or feeling into what is actually like the opportunities instead of the limitations. And then, and I was one that was just, I've been working for decades to unravel that, because that's been a really deep impact from in my life. Is this, I
Hmm.
can tell that this empowering thoughts are just prevalent, and how, and bringing in the feminine practices have helped me kind of start to unravel that.
Yep.
And some emotional cues are just the feelings of depression or jealousy. When the feminine is out of balance, it could be a lot of judgment and criticism and resentment and even anger. And then from a spiritual perspective, we just feel disconnected. We feel alone and lost, like we are isolated. And that we are also, there's a sense of confusion about what our purpose is. There's a sense that there's something missing in our life. And so what's missing is that connection to the feminine.
Hmm.
And so if anyone's saying, "Oh, I feel a lot of these," or "I feel all of these," well, then that's a sign that it's an opportunity for you to come back and nurture those feminine aspects. And the way that we can do that, and this is not about self-care. This is
Hmm.
about like really getting nurtured, because the feminine is about nurturance. So what deeply nurtures us? And what deeply nurtures us, especially according to like the spiritual traditions, is that connection to nature.
Yeah.
And whatever nature means to you, it doesn't mean you have to, go out and go hiking and camping. It could mean like you could just connect to your own personal garden or a house plant, but it's really about like getting deeply nurtured and connecting to the natural rhythm of life. Because if we feel when the feminine is out of balance, we are not connected to the natural rhythm of life, and if we don't feel like we're connected to the natural rhythm of life, then we feel isolated and alone, and then the fear starts to set in, and then we start to compete more
Hmm.
and push ourselves harder, which just continuously feeds that cycle.
Right.
So, and there's different ways that we can nurture this feminine aspect, because the feminine aspect is deeply intuitive. Of course, meditation is always a beautiful tool for that. Now,
Right.
does it mean it's the only way? Because some people are like, I don't like to meditate. You don't have to. There's yoga nidra, there's these, and bringing ourselves back into a state of rest is key for connecting to the feminine, and to also help heal some of the masculine aspects that have gotten inflamed and out of balance. Because how many of us feel overwhelmed and exhausted, and just completely depleted, like we're always just running to keep up, and we're never feeling like we are doing enough.
Right.
And so rest is actually deeply tied to the feminine, and this goes beyond sleep. This is actually taking restful moments and finding stillness,
Hmm.
so that we can move out of that sympathetic rhythm that keeps us in the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn states, and help soothe the nervous system so that we can get into that parasympathetic rhythm of rest, which is an expanded state of consciousness. And so when you're in that parasympathetic rhythm, what happens is that your consciousness actually opens up. Your brain is actually able to get out of its box. They call it,
Yeah.
when you're in that stress state, that chronic stress state, your brain actually cannot function outside of what it knows. Meaning that if you're in that chronic stress, you're only pulling information from what you know. It's impossible for you to actually reach outside of that and get new information to come in.
Right.
And so we have to get out of that state. We have to move into these states of rest, into this more feminine nature, so that we can actually, one, give our brains time to rest and actually, you know, come back to homeostasis, and then be able to extend outward and pull in this new information.
Hmm.
Okay, that was a really long answer for your question.
No, no, I appreciate that. And I guess because what I was, for me, what was kind of coming up also in the background was the whole idea of, okay, well, what does it mean to be stepping into the masculine, and what are some of the downsides of not? And I mean, there's also an aspect of tapping into nature there. That's what I find, but more so from an exploration perspective, like being out there and exploring and learning. But I also think that if it's not well balanced, it shows up as some certain traits that we see where, being over competitive. And I think for men too, there's an aspect of, I've touched on this previously on this podcast too, is there's this tendency to over compete or be the leader. But you can be the leader in your home. You don't always have to be a leader. Sometimes you need to be supportive of other men, and so you're not competing. But how can you collaborate, as you mentioned, from the perspective of the feminine? But there are certain things that we have to be mindful of too, because with men as well in that masculine space, which causes a lot of issues if not balanced appropriately.
Yeah, I think about men, the labels that are put on them and expectations. Like it's such a heavy weight to carry. Like you have to be number one, you have to excel, you have to, um, you know, if you're not winning, then you're a loser almost. It's just
Yeah.
like it's just this and this pressure to be the leader, but we can redefine what leadership means too. Leadership doesn't mean that you're right all the time and that you have to take the lead. Sometimes being a leader is stepping back and nurturing other people and allowing them to grow and into their own fullness. I mean, leadership
Mhm.
can look a lot of different ways, and I've been exploring what feminine leadership looks like. And feminine leadership is less about the individual standing on stage and being the expert and like
Right.
everybody look at me. I'm the central figurehead here and follow
Mhm.
me. It's
Right.
more about how can we step into those more collaborative roles and allow all of us to have a place and a voice and know that everyone's voice is integral and important to this web of life and to our communities, and be able to take. I had this guest on my radio show, Women Thriving Unapologetically, recently, Kama Tay Mitchell, and she talks about in her nonprofit about how, the idea of flocking. So this, how geese fly in formation, this V formation. There's someone always in the lead taking that lead, but when that leader gets tired, moves to the back, and then
Right.
someone else takes the lead. But everyone's is working together to get to to the destination. They all have the same vision, and they're working together. And it's not one person that's taken that role of leadership the whole way. And
Right.
so that's kind of an example of bringing in more of a feminine leadership approach. And I kind of like it's more of a balanced leadership
Right.
approach
Yeah.
because it's definitely the masculine and the feminine working together in a more harmonious way of moving forward. And so, because I don't want it to sound like it's just the feminine way of doing things.
Right.
It's just bringing in a little bit more of the feminine, so the masculine doesn't have to work so damn hard all the time. I mean, it's
Right.
exhausting.
And you can probably extend it to security, but in today's world, that's perceived as, oh, well, financial, how can I provide financially and provide that security, or safety for that matter. But I think it's deeper than that, and that's something I've kind of understood and exploring too. But you want to be able to, as a masculine, be able to provide that sense of security emotionally too, right? If you're not emotionally regulated, it doesn't matter, right? And then there's this notion of, oh, I want to be the protector. Well, how can you? It doesn't always have to be physical, it can be emotional too, right? Providing that sense of security and protection by being emotionally regulated, being in tune, being able to attune to your partner as well, but being present in that sense where you have the ability to understand those emotions and regulate yourself. So I don't know what your thoughts are around that, because that's something I think gets often misconstrued, because immediately in today's world it's like, oh, am I bringing the money, or am I bringing this physical aspect of protection? But it's like it's deeper than that in my mind.
Yeah, and it's we've just taken one aspect of our divine masculine potential and focused on only that and not
Mhm.
seeing it in its broader scope and ability, which is it's not just about providing financial security and physically protecting, but like you said, it's like, okay, how can I create a container
Right.
for the feminine aspects within me as
Mhm.
well within in my family to thrive? Because the interesting thing is in the yoga tradition, the divine masculine is potential energy, where the divine feminine is like kinetic energy.
Mm.
So when the masculine energy is stable, like steady, then all the creative energy that is meant to move through you can move through you from a really rooted and grounded place. So
Right.
it's about being able to be really steady and our masculine energy so that the creativity of the divine feminine can flow through us. And we need that. I mean, when we are really grounded and well rested, when we're really deeply connected to the earth and to spirit, what happens? Like amazing things can move through us. Like insights come in. We're able to feel this kind of rhythm and flow and feel deeply nurtured. So
Yeah.
it's like masculine creates the container for all of the stuff to come in and be held. And so it is like a protective force, but it's not just a physical protection. It's just creating a solid, steady, and I hesitate to say safe because, nothing is ever 100%
Right.
safe, but it's like a sanctuary.
Yeah. Yeah, and it comes back to I like the word you use, container, right? Because it is that container.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it is beyond, and I'm not saying you don't have to be the provider or the protector, but it's beyond that, right? You can provide and protect, but you may not be a safe container, then it doesn't really matter, right? So I
Mhm.
think a lot of people lose sight of that, and there's that focus just on being the provider and protector, as I mentioned. So
Yeah.
how can you then, if you're in those, you're in your divine masculine or your feminine, how can you then come together and hold that space for each other and have that container? Because I think that's probably another important aspect that people don't typically understand, right? At least that's what I see. So you've kind of embodied that in yourself. Now, how can you communicate that or create that space to perhaps even co-create?
So are you meaning like how can we do this for each other
Yeah,
or for
yeah,
other people?
yeah,
Well, it definitely always starts with yourself first.
mm,
Like okay, how am I holding myself? Am I allowing myself space to rest?
right.
And am I allowing myself time to connect to nature? Am I, you know, doing practices that develop my intuition? Am I allowing myself to feel things instead of stuffing these emotions down?
Hmm.
And so when we start to do that, what happens is it naturally becomes easier to do for other people.
Hmm.
We hear this all the time. Like, okay, you have to, really tend to yourself first. And it's not out of self, it's not, you know, out of greed or selfishness or ignoring other people. It's like, okay, if I'm not really understanding my own nature, then how can I create a container and hold other people? So it starts there, and then it becomes just, it really does almost become second nature the more that you do that for yourself. I mean, it's
Hmm.
not always easy because people are going to irritate the crap out of you. I mean, you're going to have your triggers because
That's
but
just
what happens is
reality.
you become aware. There's this ability to be so deeply aware of, oh, there I am, I'm being pulled back out. This happens to me all the time. I sit behind my computer and all of a sudden I'm just like in that mode again, and I'm not pulling away, and I can start to feel the tension come in, or I put too many things on my plate and I can start to feel myself moving towards that burnout again. I'm like, I have to pull myself back.
Right.
And I start to feel the fear come up because not enough money is coming in. And it's just this constant play of, can I keep trusting in the divine flow? And if I keep coming back to these states of rest, if I keep opening it up to the creative nature of the feminine, then what happens is that almost every single time, I will say it's happened every single time when I do that, the actions that I do take, the divine masculine actions I take, are so aligned,
Hmm.
it becomes so much easier. It's
Right.
when I don't take that time. And so what we're doing is we're taking that time for ourselves to come back into that trustful, surrendered, receptive state so that we'll know exactly what our actions are meant to be, so that when we take those actions, we're not having to expend as much energy as we would if we were just pushing ourselves through. And when we do that for ourselves, then we can start to allow space for other people to do that, because our culture really judges people that take rest.
Right.
I mean, we really like put people on a pedestal that, burn the candle at both ends.
Right.
Oh, I worked 16 hours today. Like, really? That's amazing. And then all of a sudden we feel less than because we worked maybe 5.
Right.
But, from a productive standpoint, we're not actually being highly productive during those hours. And I mean, if you are working, I think, what is it, 16 hours? Maybe it's 19 hours. If you're up for 19 hours, you are essentially legally intoxicated. Like your
Yeah.
cognitive ability, your ability to, your motor functionings are that of someone who's intoxicated.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to understand that we're really meant to have about 42% rest during to really be our optimal selves, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And so we have to allow our like check ourselves when we're judging other people. Like are we putting a badge of honor on people that are burning themselves out, or are we celebrating those that are like, I need to take a rest today. I need to
Mhm.
step away from this work for a little bit. I'm not what I'm producing right now is just coming from that exploitive state. I'm just regurgitating stuff. I'm just wasting my energy. Instead, I'm just going to take a pause and step away.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that. Like yesterday was a the day before yesterday was a terrible day. Like I woke up saying, "Oh, I have all this time to get all this stuff done. I put all this pressure on myself and nothing was flowing." And then I start to feel guilty because I'm not producing. And if I'm not producing, then I'm not worthy. And if I'm not producing, then I'm not making money. And if I'm not making money, then what's going to happen if I don't make money? Then I'm not providing for my family. And then it all just starts to go. And then I have to pull back and be like, that's just conditioning.
Yeah.
So I just have to take a moment like, okay, I'm dedicating more time now. Like I've just started this not too long ago where I'm like, okay, every single day my feet are going to be on the earth. I mean, it's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful time of year here. So I'm going to go ground. I'm going to be in nature. That's what works for me. It doesn't have to work for everyone. You can find another way
Right.
and be like, okay, I'm not going to start my day looking at my phone. I'm not going to start my day with my emails. I'm not even going to end my day with that. I'm going to end my day connecting back to my feminine nature so that I can let the masculine freaking rest.
Mm-hmm.
He needs some rest.
Right.
We
Right.
need that deep rest.
For sure. Yeah, and it's so important what you touched on there, just to kind of look at the idea of, if you've kind of learned this ability to ground yourself, first of all, recognizing when you need that grounding, as you mentioned in your own example, because I think to your point, we will get triggered, we will get escalated. So it's how are you able to ground yourself? But then also by modeling that for others, you're giving them that ability to do it for themselves and feel that aspect of regulation, and then people feed off of that. So that's how you can show up for others and perhaps embody that in other people as well. So I think that's important, being aware of it in terms of who you are, what you need, and how to ground yourself. So then you're modeling that for others, and creating that environment of
Yeah.
safety. And then I think a lot of people do gravitate towards that because that is our natural tendency. As you mentioned, I think you touched on it a lot earlier in this episode, the whole notion of homeostasis, right? If that's where we're supposed to be, in that balanced state, and
Mhm.
we lose sight of it, especially with the hustle culture we're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Is there anything else you feel like the listeners could benefit from and we haven't perhaps touched on, that would be of value to add here?
Oh, one thing? Oh, there's so many things, but you know, compassion is really, really essential. Like if self-compassion is at the heart of divine feminine awakening,
Hmm.
and it's not an easy thing to do for men or for women. And but when we can give ourselves that compassion, what happens is we immediately start to unravel some of the dominant culture's belief systems that have been really weighing us down and holding us back. Because when we are like, oh, I recognize that I need to pull back, I need some rest, I recognize that and allow yourself to have that, to recognize when there's a part of you that's been being activated or judgmental, offering compassion to that part instead of judgment.
Hmm.
When or and then extending that out to someone else, like, oh, they're this person is probably reacting that I don't know what their story is. I don't need to know their story, but I can offer them compassion. And in doing that, I'm releasing my judgments that I'm placing upon them. I'm not going to judge them for needing to take rest or not being able to show up the way that I expected them to show up, because I don't know what's going on in their lives.
Hmm.
But understanding that if they're not showing up the way that I want them to, one, check why I have an expectation on that, but two, understanding that there's something going on in their lives enough that they just need to have some space, and allowing them to have that space. So compassion, compassion, compassion is
Hmm.
really at the heart of really healing a lot of the wounding that we've placed upon ourselves and upon other people. And
Right.
it can really start to unravel a lot of, yeah, just the toxic beliefs that we have.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think with that compassion, you're able to hold away from judging others too, right? Because then
Mhm.
you've given it to yourself, but then you're also giving it to others, and then there's no place of judgment. And I think that's kind of what holds us back in society is this inability to have compassion for ourselves, and then it's easier to judge everything, which creates a lot of issues, right? We're not all the same, we're all trying to figure it out, and that's part of the journey, right? So how can you not only give yourself that grace but hold that space for others?
And I have a colleague, and even I'd even call her a mentor because she's amazing. She was on my show as well. Her name is Jean Mazet, and she always says that everyone is doing the best that they can in this moment. And that's hard to accept at times, but if you could have done better 5 seconds ago, you would have.
Right. Yeah.
And so we have to understand that compassion for ourselves, but other people, like if they could have done better, they would have,
Right.
based on what they have learned in their lives, what their belief system, the lens that they're looking through, what they believe to be true. And so we're just constantly learning.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lindsay, for coming on here and sharing your wisdom and having this conversation with me. For listeners that do want to find you or get a hold of you, what are some ways they can do that?
So obviously I have a website, it's just my name, lynsiemckeown.com. They can reach me there, and I offer a complimentary one-on-one session for those that just want to kind of explore what working together would look like. So, because I always feel like we should try something on to see if it fits first, and that this just gives an opportunity because to see what's going on in your life, what you might need support with, and see if I'm the right person for that, and see if it will work really well together. So you can go to my website for that. And also, if you sign up for my newsletter, I send you 3 amazing practices that help you feel rested and supported. So one of which is a breathing practice, one's a meditation, and one's a yoga nidra. So it really helps you connect deeply to the rest state and the feminine. And of course, I'm on social media, but I really love to build community. So if anyone wants to just email me, I respond very quickly to that, probably more so than social media. So I'm a little bit of an anomaly there. And also I have a radio show, Women Thriving Unapologetically. So if anyone wants to tune in and listen, it's a great platform that's on the rise to support us to understand what real thriving means
Mhm.
and how to move through our challenges in life with more grace and ease.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I'll put all of that in the show notes as well. So
Yeah,
thank you again for coming on here
thank
and having,
you.
yeah.
It's been great to be here, and I appreciate you inviting me on to Easy Conversations. It's been an easy conversation.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.